So I want to say that if we are in a simulation, the objects around us are real. They're digital objects, but they make a difference. They're not all in the mind, and they're not illusions. So what I want to say is the following. The simulation hypothesis is a version of the so-called it from bit hypothesis, often taken seriously within physics. The it from bit hypothesis says that everything in the physical world is made of bits. We're living in a universe grounded in bits. And this is a hypothesis that physicists take seriously, and they don't regard this as the hypothesis where the world is an illusion, just the world is made of bits. My argument is that if we're in a simulation, we're living in a universe where the world is made of bits. Objects in the world are made of bits, but they're still perfectly real. Here's an illustration of this. Here's like on the left-hand side, we've got a traditional God creating the world by creating bits. Here's how, it's what I call the it from bit creation hypothesis. God creates some bits that make atoms, that make molecules, that make the world. On the right-hand side, we have the simulation version of this, the simulator, who I'm thinking of now as a teenage girl in the next universe up. A simulator is programming a computer, thereby creating a world of bits, thereby creating all the objects in this world, digital objects. I'm going to say the simulation version is equivalent to the it from bit version, and the objects are just as real. So if that's right, then if we're in a simulation, objects are real, they're just made of bits. So yes, we could be in a simulation, but if we're in a simulation, things are still perfectly real. They're just digital. So that gives us, virtual reality is, we're at least halfway to virtual reality is genuine reality. Virtual reality is genuine reality. It's just digital. And then, okay, so that's the matrix part. Now I want to kind of bring it home by talking about a less extreme case, the case of the metaverse, becoming virtual reality technology. So the metaverse, yes, Stevenson's version was a single massive social virtual world. Zuckerberg's version is something like a global interconnected system of virtual worlds, the immersive internet. The metaverse idea is continuous with kind of realistic VR, the kind of VR that people are using now, even with a, say, Oculus Quest headsets. In real VR, as opposed to Matrix-style simulations, you don't spend your whole life there. You go into VR for a while, then you come out. You know you're using VR, unlike the Matrix case, perhaps, and it's much, much simpler than a universe simulation. But I want to say some of the same morals of the simulation case also extend to the metaverse and to real VR. Now, again, there's this common line that VR is an illusion or a hallucination. William Gibson, a neuromancer, defined cyberspace, by which I think he meant virtual reality, as a consensual hallucination experienced daily. By definition, he defined it as a hallucination. Again, I want to resist this idea that VR has to be an illusion or a hallucination. In the movie Ready Player One, you hear at one point, reality is the only thing that's real, by which they seem to mean physical reality is the only thing that's real. Again, I think that's a philosophical mistake. I think digital reality is real too. So the standard view is virtual objects are unreal, they're illusions, hallucinations, or fictions. My view is virtual objects are real. They're non-illusory digital objects. And you can see why my view of the simulation case and the matrix case would generalize naturally to thinking about VR this way. Virtual objects really do make a difference when you're using a VR headset. There are real digital objects doing real things. I mean, if we're in a full-scale simulation like the Matrix, the objects we're interacting with are real digital objects running on a computer. If I'm in the Matrix right now, then this apparent physical book is actually a digital book that I'm interacting with. I think you can generalize that point even to ordinary VR. The objects we're interacting with are real digital objects, their data structures concretely running on a computer. Real objects you're interacting with, just digital objects. Here I've got this example. We've got a biological kitten, we've got a robot kitten, and we've got a virtual kitten. Now, I agree that a robot kitten is not it's not a biological kitten. We wouldn't normally say it's just a kitten. It's a real kitten, but it's still a real object. My own view is that virtual kittens are at least as real as robot kittens. They're digital, which makes them different kinds of entities, but it has just as many causal powers. It's just as real as a robot kitten. A robot kitten is a real thing in the world. It's not an illusion. I mean, it's not exactly the same as a biological kitten. It's digital, but it's nonetheless real. I want to say the same thing for the virtual kitten. Another question is whether VR is an illusion. You might say, okay, virtual objects are real. I accept that. They're real digital objects. But you might say, nonetheless, it's an illusion because things seem to be out there in physical space where they're not. And I think maybe some users of VR get this kind of illusion. Novice users of VR, using VR for the first time, they may experience objects as being out there in physical space, which is an illusion. But expert users of VR experience objects as being in virtual space. They know they're in VR. They interpret the objects around them as being in VR, as in virtual space, and that's not an illusion. When I see an object in front of me in VR, I think, yeah, there really is a virtual object in front of me in virtual space. I think expert users have non-illusory perception of virtual worlds. So I think VR needn't be an illusion. The final question is the one about value and meaning. Can you have a meaningful life in a virtual world? Can life in VR be as good, or for some people better, than life in non-virtual reality? And I want to say yes to both questions. You might be led to worry about this. Plato in Plato's cave said, maybe we're just seeing shadows on the cave wall and none of this is real. And he thought that kind of life was not as good. Here's an updated version, Plato's cave for the 21st century. That's Mark Zuckerberg on the laptop with the people all strapped in, seeing virtual reality. You might think, okay, this is trying to pump the intuition that virtual reality has to be second class, not as real. But that's actually what I want to reject. Another version of this idea, of the idea that VR is not as meaningful, was put forward by the American philosopher Robert Nozick in his book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, where he talked about the experience machine. An experience machine is this machine that gives you amazing experiences of being the world's best at what you do, having wonderful family, wonderful relationships, all kinds of pleasure, everything is good. But in fact, your body is floating in a tank. In this illustration, we're kind of going with the idea that Nozick should have realized or should have thought that he himself was in the experience machine. Successful professor at Harvard, winning the National Book Award, prime candidate for experiences from an experience machine. Anyway, so Nozick asked the question, should you enter the experience machine, pre-programming wonderful experiences for life? And he wanted to say no. He said no. And there seem to be at least three reasons for this. The experience machine is pre-programmed. It has no autonomy. You're just living out a script in the experience machine. The experience machine is illusory. None of the things you think you're doing are actually happening. They're just illusions, no reality. Third, he said the experience machine is artificial. We want to be in contact with nature, with natural reality. This is all human-made. I want to say none of those reasons are good reasons not to enter VR. For a start, VR is, unlike the experience machine, VR is not pre-programmed. It's not scripted. It's interactive. In a social virtual world, you can make your own life. You have free will. You can make your own decisions. You can build relationships. You can build communities. So it's in no sense pre-programmed. Furthermore, I've argued it's not illusory. What you do in VR really happens. The actions you take in VR, you really perform. Third, yeah, VR may be artificial, but so are cities. Many of us, I spend much of my life in New York City. Most of us spend most of our lives indoors. That's an artificial reality, but it doesn't seem to be a blockade to living a meaningful life. So I think none of these reasons of Nozick's are good reason not to enter VR. In my view, what does give our lives meaning and value? I think our lives have meaning because of the experiences we have, the relationships we have with other people, our projects and our achievements, more generally our desires and satisfying them, maybe things like knowledge and understanding. I think all of these values can in principle be present in VR. Yes, the reality around you is digital rather than physical, but we find meaning in physical objects. We invest them with meaning. I think we can do just the same for digital objects. It's true that VR may be missing some sources of value for some people. I don't want to say like it's superior in every respect. That would obviously be wrong. If you value nature, you'll get more nature in physical reality than in virtual reality. VR is by nature artificial. You don't get full-scale birth and death inside VR, which for some people will be, a lack of one source of meaning. You don't get sheer physicality in VR. Some people may value sheer physicality. If you do, then fine. But VR also has new sources of value, new bodies in principle. Remembering now that many people, their access to physical reality is not so perfect. Say aging people, disabled people, oppressed people. VR offers new forms of embodiment and new communities they may have better access to, new forms of experience. You can fly in VR, near unlimited space, an abundance of goods, instant travel. I don't say one of these is necessarily better than the other. In the long term, it's rational for some people to prefer physical reality, but also rational for others to prefer virtual reality. Here's an illustration of this. Is there two people choosing? There's like a virtual reality you can go to, get in, connect to VR, or terraform reality, a new planet somewhere in the distance that's been terraformed, and two people are choosing to build new lives there. I think you can choose one, you can choose the other. There's nothing dictating that terraform is necessarily better than virtual reality just because one's physical and the other is digital. So I'd say you can live a meaningful life in VR. Life may be good or it may be awful, but the full scale of human experience is available. This connects to this question, which a lot of people worry about. Is the prospect of life in VR, is it utopian or is it dystopian? I would say that it's got potential elements of both. If you're looking for utopia in VR, VR has new bodies, new forms of experience, near unlimited space, virtual abundance, this idea that everyone can live near the beach, wonderful mansion. Digital objects are so easy to duplicate, so that if you want to be utopian, you can find it there. If you want to be dystopian, there are many potentially dystopian elements of VR. Right now, virtual worlds are almost all governed by corporations. They're a form of corporatocracy or corporate gods. Maybe we'll have Apple reality and Facebook reality and Google reality. With each of these corporations controlling our worlds, this brings obvious privacy issues. These corporations are omniscient, they're omnipotent, which leads to all kinds of worries about manipulation. There's inevitably going to be unequal access to these virtual worlds. There are worries about neglecting the physical world. So I'd say there are many amazing potential upsides of VR, but also many perils. There's many promises, many perils. I don't want to minimize the perils, but I think the promises are amazing too. If I had to guess, I would say that the metaverse will be like the internet. It's brought wonderful things. It's also brought awful things. I'd like to think that in the case of the internet, the net value has been positive, despite all the awful things it's brought. I'd like to think the same is true of the metaverse. Anyway, so then to conclude my talk, to sum everything up, I'll just return to my original slogan: virtual reality is genuine reality. And I'll just add, the rest is up to us. Thank you.